Please, sit down, have a seat. We need to talk about your email address. Personal email addresses have been a topic that I have discussed in multiple mediums and formats over the course of my blogging, vlogging, actual writing career. This is one of the things that I always try to provide advice on. I wanted to condense all of the advice that I've provided over the last, 10 to 15 years into this video. And I will also give credit to Lifehacker. I recently read an article on Lifehacker by an author named Jeff Summers, and he wrote an article about email addresses as well that also prompted me to want to do this video. If you were an early technology adopter in the 1990s, you probably had an AOL email address, and it started from there, and then you probably signed up for a Yahoo, and then a live.com, and then Hotmail. Yeah, you remember Hotmail? Microsoft bought them. There was a Hotmail account, and then, in the early 2010s, 2009, whatever, Gmail came out, and now everybody has Gmail. Going back to those early email addresses, it's okay to admit, you probably had an email like SparkleKitten79, DiceRod44 at hotmail.com. Most people figured out at a certain point that having your custom or your internet character email address is probably not a great idea to put on your resume. Superhero44 at yahoo.com, that's probably not very professional. And a lot of people have pivoted. I can say that in the amount of time that I have started reviewing resumes, and I've reviewed a whole bunch recently, you don't see that a lot. But something that you may not consider is the other side of that email address. While you may not use your SparkleKitten79 anymore, but some of those older email providers, the live.coms, I don't even think Hotmail's around anymore, the AOLs for sure, that may indicate something. That may provide information about you to a potential recruiter or a hiring manager, and it may not give the best first impression about you. It may give an impression that you are not someone who embraces technology and updating technology. And I'll also admit the other side of this conversation is, yes, that is digital snobbery. That is a little snobbish to look at someone's email address and be like, oh, they're using a live.com account or whatever it may be. Regardless of whether or not it is digital snobbery, it may be happening. And why would you impact your chances just because you don't want to change to a different free email address? It's something to consider. Since I mentioned free email addresses, let's zone in on that one for a second. I frequently, in articles and in social media posts and in advice to friends and family, I often tell people to not use their internet service provider email address. I live in New Jersey. I am in Comcast country. I really don't have other ISP options, but I would never use my Comcast email address for anything. And the problem is that if I ever do get a really good option to pivot to a different internet service provider, I may do that, and then I will lose that email address. I think that you should always have one of the free email addresses, have an account, and use that as your default account. Like a Gmail, you can have all of those email accounts forwarded to the one address. Speaking of Comcast, I noticed that when they provide you your first default email address, they tend to throw in numbers in it's like Joe.Lombardi or Joe Lombardi, and they may put like your house number in the number of the email address. My next bit of advice is to try to avoid putting as much personal information as you can in that email address. Like, don't put your year of birth in the email address name. Don't put your house number if you can avoid it, or some other important number to you. Try to keep it as clinical as possible, which I know is confusing because on the one hand, I started off this video by saying, don't make nonsensical email address names like SparkleKitten44. But on the other side, try to use your name or your initials and your last name. You should have something that is somewhat professional. And when a recruiter or someone is looking at that email address, they have a semblance of an idea that that is actually your email. For all intent and purposes, just to make sure if they're looking at your resume, they're not typing in the wrong response to someone. When I owned my computer store, the local schools used to ask me to come in and talk to the kids about cybersecurity, which was actually pretty nuanced and advanced. This was circa 2004, 2005, 2006. But the schools were asking me to come in to talk to the kids about how to be safe online. And that was one of the first things I said to them. Don't have any personal information in any of your handles that someone can use to get in and try to talk to you and be creepy. And that leads me to my final point. You might be sitting there saying, yeah, Joe, this is all really good advice, but all of the good email addresses are taken. I can't get my name. I can't get some variation of my first name, last name. All of those things are long gone with all of the cool or neutral. That was a term in the Lifehacker article. They use Gmail. They call Gmail like a neutral email provider. Like there's no opinion one way or the other. So if you're like, I can't get my first name, last name, or some variation of that in my email provider of choice, you can always go out and buy a domain, and you can do your first name, last name at the domain. Domains are fairly cheap. You can get them for less than $10 a year, especially for the email services. I would say from a personal branding perspective, and yes, this is going to obviously be very skewed as a guy who has YouTube channels and vlogs and blogs and joeylombardi.com and all that other stuff. I think it's important to have a domain with some of your resume or portfolio on it as a professional, a place that you can send people that isn't a LinkedIn or a Facebook page. You own it, you control it, and if those sites go out of business or fall out of favor, like AOL.com, you have something that you can point people to. So I'm a big fan of registering your own personal domain. I'm a big fan of having a vanity email address so you can actually have your name and it looks a little bit more professional. I'm going to say it's not necessary. It is not an absolutely necessary thing to do, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And if you feel like you can't get your cool name, if you're like John Smith and you know that you're never going to get any variation of that name, maybe try to go out and get a personal domain. Thank you for listening to me go off about my personal preferences about email addresses, and thank you to Lifehacker for giving me an article and an idea that also validates the points and feelings that I've had for the better part of 20 years about email addresses. So good luck out there. I hope you find the email address of choice if you don't have one, and for the love of Christmas, if you have an AOL account, go out and get a free Gmail. Just do it. Just do it. Okay, that's it. Thank you for watching this video. Give a like or a subscribe. Throw a comment in if you feel differently about any of this, or if you have a crazy story about somebody reacting poorly or very positively to one of your email addresses, throw that into the comments below. And I'll be back with another video in 2 weeks. Take care.